The fighting has ceased. Hostages and prisoners are being returned. What are the next steps for this peace deal, Katie?
So I think it's worth just saying at the outset, this is a rare, unequivocally good day in the region. It is unequivocally great news that a ceasefire is in place, that aid is now surging into Gaza, and that all of the surviving Israeli hostages are free. So, it's worth just remarking on how important a moment this is and how long sought this has been in the coming. This is more than 2 years in the making. That being said, I think the really hard part now comes next. I think we are seeing what amounts to phase one of a deal here, and we have been somewhat here before. So effectively what we have now is the exchange of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners and around 1,700 Gazans who were detained during the war, a ceasefire in place and aid going in. But what is yet to be resolved are the really tough parts of this 20-point peace plan, specifically the idea that Hamas is going to voluntarily disarm, that a multinational stabilization force, which has yet to be agreed, is going to go in, and that a technocratic civilian government is going to be installed. The signs over this weekend were not encouraging. There's very credible reporting of Hamas militants taking part in gun battles with rival factions in Gaza. So far from voluntarily handing over their weapons, it seems that they're actually looking to consolidate their control within that territory. And similarly, while the Israeli military has withdrawn to what's called the yellow line inside Gaza, these are agreed upon positions that they are pulling back to. They still control around half of the Gaza Strip, and there is no timetable and no commitment to a full withdrawal. So, a short summary of that is that there is very much, and these are very important points that are still outstanding and still not agreed.
Do you think it's feasible that the Israelis ever would fully withdraw from the Strip?
I think the problem is not necessarily, would they withdraw to an agreed upon perimeter? And there's talk about a security perimeter around Gaza. It's how to make that permanent. We've seen these repeated cycles of violence, conflict, periodic Israeli occupation, periods of ceasefire, peace, and then the cycle starts again. The really tough part is translating, a temporary ceasefire, which, at the moment, Hamas has reasons to agree to that. It has been devastated. Many of its leaders have been killed. It needs time to consolidate its strength. The real difficulty here, and the thing that has frustrated decades of negotiations and, very well-meaning envoys, including from here in the United States, is trying to translate that then into a permanent, durable settlement that includes, a state, rights, dignity, and security for the Palestinians, alongside security for Israel. So these are extremely complex, challenging issues that have eluded past negotiating teams. And, if this can be different this time, then perhaps Trump will deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. But, this is the start of the really tough part now. So this is the time to really focus and follow through rather than, declare victory and move on.
Freddie, why now? What changed? Why did the Trump administration sort of choose to engage at this point? We could have done, for example, in May when the aid cut off.
Well, they've been engaged the whole time. Let's remember that Witkoff has been in the region in and out for months. I mean, the administration in general has been focused on this, and Trump's seen it as one of the key opportunities of his administration. The key thing is why them and not Biden, I think. Why is Trump being able to slice through this Gordian knot and Biden failed? I mean, if you read accounts of those negotiations, Bob Woodward's book War is one of the best insider accounts that we have, is that there was no respect between Netanyahu and Biden. Biden would tell Netanyahu to do certain things, and the Israelis would completely ignore them or not inform them when they were about to deliver a strike or whatever it might be. And then Netanyahu actually tried to do this again with Trump when he launched that attack on Doha a week or so ago. And this was a turning point. And there was initial reports that the US actually approved the strike, but that turns out that was not correct. This very much annoyed the White House. It led to a slap down from Trump on Netanyahu. We had this amazing photo when Netanyahu visited the White House the other day of Trump crossing his arms and watching as he forced Netanyahu to apologize to the Qatari Prime Minister Al Thani. That's a remarkable slapdown and a remarkable change in the power dynamic between Netanyahu and the White House. So I think that's really important. We saw that in the negotiations in more recent weeks, where I think Trump called Netanyahu and said he needed to stop being so fucking negative. So there was a way in which that Trump moved beyond this sort of blasé, ideological, no questions asked support for Israel. We've seen this more broadly as well. He's very keen on the Qataris. He's very keen on the Gulf states. He is very keen to maintain his relationship with Erdogan, for instance, who is one of the key opponents of Israel. So he is very much a supporter of Israel, and we've seen that with his visit to the Knesset this morning. But he's also willing to enforce his will on Netanyahu. And I think that was a key change.
Yeah, the Biden lot were briefing out about this bear hug strategy they had, right? But I don't know whether actually they sort of had the props to deliver like a normal hug in the first place, whereas Trump, moves the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, doesn't even recognize the illegality of the settlements in the West Bank. It positions him, and it's probably why Netanyahu does refer to him as the greatest friend in the White House that Israel has ever had. I do just wonder if there's this alternate perspective, though, and perhaps we can over-egg the importance of Trump. And is it that essentially Israel has achieved most of its military objectives? The strip is rubble. Hezbollah is operationally useless. They've struck the Iranians' nuclear program. Is it just a case that actually, regardless of who was in the White House, the Israelis are pretty happy with the military campaign, and so are comfortable striking a peace deal now?
Perhaps. I think there's definitely members of the cabinet who are not happy with it, and they would happily have occupied Gaza indefinitely. And then
Smotrich, Ben Gvir, etc.
Yeah, and there's also been lots of talk about ethnic cleansing, about moving the Gazans out of the strip. So that at one point was the aim of the Israelis, or at least many Israeli politicians who had power. So this ceasefire deal is a setback. What we should know, and I think Katie alluded to this a moment ago, is the lack of political human rights within the agreement. It's almost very much, as they use the word themselves, it's very much a technocratic deal. It's like it's a Danzig for the 21st century. It's this internationalized city that's going to be run by these technocrats who come in as viziers or viceroys to Trump's emperor. And I think that makes it more possible because it's about capital investment. It's about the Gulf monarchs coming in and helping build great casinos. That sounds like the idea. It is not explicitly about the development of a democratic Palestinian state. So as soon as you don't focus on that as your primary goal, it becomes, I think, much easier to go, okay, well, actually, let's just get let's make it a new Dubai.
Yeah, Katie, I've got some choice quotes here from Kushner talking about Witkoff. The experience that Steve and I have as deal guys is that you have to understand people. A lot of the people who do this are history professors because they have a lot of experience, or diplomats. It's just different being deal guys. It's just a different sport. And so perhaps
sport being the key word there.
Yeah, it's a game. Yeah, it's a game. But I guess that means that you do end up with a deal that focuses more on, for example, the reconstruction, the perhaps liberalization that permits the construction of casinos, I don't know, rather than necessarily Palestinian statehood, viable elections, etc.
Right. And I think if you remove the meddlesome history professors and all of those, professional diplomats who are going to get you bogged down in details of the very many barriers to, a durable peace in the past here, it is a lot easier to get to a deal. And I think, that is both the strength and the weakness of the Trump administration's approach. He is wholly unideological about this, and governments in the region look at him as somebody who's prepared to do a deal, who is not going to get stuck on issues like human rights and necessarily statehood for Palestinians. The Qataris very famously donated him a new Air Force One, extremely expensive airplane. They, this is how governments are going about negotiating with the Trump administration, giving him something ideally very flashy, very expensive, that sounds very good and looks good on paper, and seeing what they can extract in return. But that isn't the same as a long-term workable solution. And I think the weakness of that approach is that I think a lot of interlocutors do see this team as pretty much lacking in follow-through. In search of the shiny objects. Trump has famously been described as a deal-seeking missile. He wants the deal. He wants the victory lap that he's taking right now. He's been at the Knesset in Jerusalem this morning, announcing the historic dawn of a new era in the Middle East. He has talked about this deal as one of the great days ever in civilization. Eternal peace. This is forever. He wants the triumphant side of this. He wants a great achievement for his presidency. He wants a legacy. The tough part is that he has previously not proved that he's prepared to focus on the details and really, knuckle down and show patience and long-term resolve on the sticking points here. So, maybe that all changes and he is now really committed to see this through and produce something that would genuinely be historic. But that would be quite a departure from how he's gone about it previously. I think the other point that's just worth making is that one of the reasons that Hamas was very reluctant to give up the remaining Israeli hostages was what is quite a credible fear that once they don't have that leverage, what reason is there for Israel not to restart the war and continue that war? Getting the hostages back is a domestic political victory for Netanyahu. That was something that was really genuinely divisive in Israel. Now that those hostages are free, you can look at it that there might be less cause for restraint on Netanyahu if this ceasefire breaks down, if in the months and years to come there are grounds to restart this war. Netanyahu will do that from a position of greater strength. So I think there is reason to be concerned in the short and medium term about how far this is going to go.
I don't know if you guys caught that much of that speech or the preamble before it to the Knesset, but the speaker described Trump as a giant of Jewish history and said you would have to go back 2.5 millennia to Cyrus the Great before you found a figure of comparable import to the Jewish people, which was obviously quite impressive in terms of the timescale involved. Freddie, do you think it's going to hold? And what do you see as the key factors? I guess I'd probably look at the fact that if Trump does want the Nobel Peace Prize, you'll need the peace to hold at least until next year. And then you add in the fact that sort of Netanyahu's personal political fate has been reliant at times, delays to the corruption trial have been reliant on the continuation of this war. How do you see it panning out?
Yeah, and remembering that speech this morning, Trump called for Netanyahu to get a pardon for the charges against him. So let's see how that pans out. How the general deal and whether the peace will hold, I don't know. I mean, I was speaking to one intelligence source the other day, and they were predicting that because there are too many weapons within Gaza itself, it would be very hard to disarm it, as Katie was suggesting. And then also they were thinking that it was most likely that this international stabilization force, this international a body of soldiers will be fired upon and at some point, and therefore the IDF will use that as an excuse to come back. But before that even happens, we don't know whether the IDF will withdraw to the lines that they're supposed to. Those lines are very porous and quite ambiguous, and also they're quite far into Gaza. So the question of whether peace will hold, I think, I don't know. I don't think many people know at the moment. But I think there are many parts of this deal which suggest that there isn't the conditions for a long-term sustainable peace. Maybe in a few weeks or so, and Trump suggested that they're going to be talking about this in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, those conditions will arise and they will reach some political settlement that will deal with some of the more intractable aspects of this conflict. Maybe we'll see that. But at the moment, the conditions are not there. The ceasefire is holding for today, but we don't know how that's going to pan out in the coming days and weeks.